Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on Sifted Games at SIFTD.net. This show happens because some of you awesome people are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/Sifted. There's a tier there called Ask Shane. So many of you folks are pledging there. This show keeps on rolling. I really like doing it, but of course, we need questions. It's called Ask Shane Anything. So head on over to SIFTD.net. There's a link in the header there. You can go to our forums. You can ask me questions about literally anything. And just to be fair, I really do enjoy kind of the off-the-cuff questions that aren't related to gaming, because obviously I talk about gaming a lot across GameFace and all the other stuff that we do. So thanks to everybody who pledges anything. Let's get on to this week's question. Okay, our first question this week comes from Ben. You've mentioned a couple times about the shifting face of the gaming industry, particularly as higher proportions of people primarily play live services. Lots of P's there. Do you see things changing enough in the near future to take away your interest in covering the medium? How do you see your relationship with the industry changing over the next decade? Well, Ben, I have been doing this a long time, man. I made my first dollar covering the video game industry in 1997 with my little fan site I was running in college called Street Level Gaming. And I have seen so many things come and go. So many red herrings, things that you thought were going to be big that ended up not being big at all. So many things that I saw for the first time and thought it was ridiculous and didn't think it was going to catch on, and it absolutely did. I think over the last 3 decades of doing anything for 3 decades, I think you have to learn to become open-minded. And I think you also have to learn to accept that you don't know everything and you're going to be wrong. And I think some of those pleasant surprises are what invigorate me in a lot of ways and keep me interested in this medium. You're not going to like everything about everything. That's just life. And video games are no different than anything else in life. Some things are going to happen and you're going to be like, wow, this is great. I love it. Some things are going to happen and you're going to be like, dang, man, that really sucks. That's just life in general. And covering the games industry is no different. There are trends that have come along that I've hated. There are trends that have come along that I've really loved. And there's been stuff in the middle I'm kind of indifferent to. All that stuff you have to take into account and realize that that's just kind of the way things are. So I think the only way that this industry would eventually become something that I'm no longer interested in, or definitely interested in covering, is if I became closed-minded. And I got to the point where I was no longer open to new ideas and concepts. Now, back to kind of the core of your question about service games and all that. I don't hate service games. I really don't have a grudge against them at all. I do think they're dangerous if you like playing single-player games that cost a lot of money to make. I do think that they're a detriment to that sort of cadence of game releases across the industry. What we're used to is getting a lot of great single-player games, and I think that that's going to fade over time because of live service games. Now, again, I don't have a problem with live service. I play them. I don't play a ton of them. You know, I play Marvel Rivals here and there. I used to play League of Legends a lot. A lot of these games I go through phases with. Other people will stick with them the whole time. I'll play them for a while, stop, go back, blah, blah, blah. But I have no grudge against live service games at all. I'm just pointing out, as a critic, some of the pitfalls of live service games, which is, if you're like a lot of people on Sifted, and you like single-player games that have $200 million budgets, games as a service could be a detriment to that. So it's not that I love it or I hate it. It's my job to point things out, and that's what I do. So no, I do not see live service games lowering my interest in the industry in any way, shape, or form. I think this is, I wouldn't call it a phase. I think it's more than something that's going to happen for a couple years and then go away, because it already has been more than a couple years. I don't see it fading, but I do think that over time you'll start to see some of the younger players, not all of them, but some of them realize that, hey, you know what? I like single-player games. All the stuff my dad and my uncle were talking about, like, I get it now. I don't think there will be a mass exodus away from live service games eventually, but I do think you'll start to see some of the younger generations start to come back into our fold, so to speak. But I don't think things are ever going to be the same again. But I think a lot of people said that back when the Wii was killing it, And I think everybody at that moment thought that motion controlled games were the future and that's the way the industry was going to be. And we see now that that was absolutely not the case. That could be the same deal with live service games. So I think we're safe. We have 20 years of viability as gaming consumers left. I think the process of weeding out the single player games being replaced by live service games is going to be really slow and gradual. So I think we're going to be okay. I think it's the next generation that's really going to have to make some decisions on what kind of interactive entertainment they want to consume going forward. Now, the next decade, nobody can predict the next decade. I wish I could. I'd be a very wealthy man. But all I know is that I have seen so many changes to the gaming industry, the games industry, across my 20, almost 30 years of covering it. And I'm still here that I find it hard to believe that anything could happen in the next decade that would really change that. Okay, next up we have a question from Kevin. I played Monster Hunter World and was not really a fan. I feel like I'm alone on a planet when I see the sales of Monster Hunter Wilds. What is it about this franchise that is so great and unique? This is something that Matt and I talked about on Game Face this past week when we talked about how so many of the young audience are playing live service games and not playing single player games. It's a sense of community. It's the replacement for running home after school and jumping on the phone and talking to your friends for 3 hours like I did when I was a tween. They've replaced that with playing games together. Instead of talking on the phone, they play a game and they talk while they're playing the games and they do their emotes, and it's a different way of communication, but it's the same core concept. And that's why it's popular, but that's not the only reason why it's popular. There's a lot of things that go into it. I would say one thing that's important is that it's not an M-rated game. And so parents, even though I think it's teen, I think most parents are okay letting their kids play the game. So that opens up a huge market. That opens up the Fortnite market, so to speak, to playing the game. I think another part of it is, at least in the past, and it's still kind of this way, honestly, is that you can play the game in little chunks, accomplish something significant in a lot of cases, and put it down and leave and come back the next day and do it all over again. I think that's maybe one of the big reasons the younger generations aren't latching on to single-player games, because you have to kind of remember what you did before. With Monster Hunter, it doesn't really matter. You finish your mission, you kill the monster, you get the stuff, you go back to base, you turn it into armor or weapons, and you're done. You can stop right there, and it's no big deal. And you can come back the next day and do the same thing. Get the next mission, kill the next monster, craft the next armor. It's a very simple but addictive loop. And the timing of it all, I think, is what's really kind of sets it apart from other games. Again, 30 minutes, 40-minute commitment. You can jump in, play with your friends, chat, all that kind of stuff while you're doing it. And then after 40 minutes, it's done. It doesn't require it taking over your life. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part, too, is that people like fighting big monsters. I mean, you get to the core of it. There's a reason kids, a lot of kids anyway, are completely obsessed with dinosaurs. People love gigantic creatures. There's a fascination there about it. Now you're killing them in this game, which has a little bit of a twist to it, but I still think that people generally just like seeing the massive monsters. And then there's the whole teamwork element of it and blah, blah, blah. So while I can completely understand how some people would bounce off the Monster Hunter franchise and think it's very vapid, and to be fair, up until this entry, kind of crude, honestly, as far as presentation and stuff is concerned. I can see where you might bounce off of it, but I can also see why a lot of people really love it, and I enjoy it. Like, I got addicted to it once. Monster Hunter Tri hooked me in, and this was, 2 decades ago or whatever, but it hooked me in, and I played it for 100 and some hours. But once I finally got rid of Monster Hunter Tri, they have never changed the franchise enough to get me to come back in and get sucked into it again. I feel like I've kind of been there, done that, but there's always a new wave of 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds ready to play games that we've already played and kind of written off. So I can totally understand your perspective. I can also understand why you would be like, wow, what's wrong with me? Everybody loves this, but I don't. My entire life's been that way. I continually fall in love with things that other people don't give a crap about, like house music and things like that. That's the way my whole life has been, so don't feel bad about it. I think it just helps set people like us apart. Next question comes from Gregor G. What's the origin story behind your gamer handle Dinfire? Well, I've told the story before, but I haven't told it in a really long time, so I'm guessing a lot of you guys do not know. So Dinfire is a combination of two things for me. Din was my DJ name, and Fire was my graffiti name. Now, for the first 8 years, I was a house DJ, and I was playing all over the East Coast. Promoters flying me to their city, pick me up at the airport, start playing at like 2 or 3 in the morning, play from 2 in the morning till like 5 or 6 in the morning, go to the hotel, sleep for 5 hours, someone comes and picks me up, takes me to the airport, and I fly home. I was doing that while I was going to college for years. And my DJ name during that entire time was just Shane, and it worked fine because house music in that scene was so small that just using my first name, Shane, was enough for people to remember, oh, DJ Shane. And as time went on, the scene started growing and getting so big, I started discovering that there were other Shanes in like Florida, and there was another one in like Boston. And I was like, man, I probably need to change my name. It's not going to work just being called Shane anymore. And so I changed my name to Din. And Din is another word for a massive sound or whatever. And I was graffiti writing at the time, and my graffiti writing name was Fire, F-I-R-E. And so when the internet happened, and I was like, man, I guess I need to create some kind of a persona, I just smashed the two together into Dinfire. A lot of people think it's a Zelda reference, Din's Fire from Ocarina of Time. That is not the case. It actually has nothing to do with Zelda at all. Din was my DJ name, Fire was my graffiti writer name, and I just combined the two into Dinfire. Okay, our last question for this episode comes from Erebus Jones. Towards the end of last week's review for Avowed, you said something I thought was interesting. You decided to evaluate the game like it was a $70 release, rather than consider explicitly the Game Pass price. What is your thinking behind that choice? Are you doing the platform a disservice by not recognizing the only thing Xbox has going for it, cheaper access to games? Well, first of all, I do not agree with your assertion that the only thing that Xbox has going for it is cheap access to games. Right now, Xbox is releasing tons of excellent games, Avowed being one of them. So I don't believe that at all. I think Xbox has a lot to offer game players besides just Game Pass. Now to your question, and I didn't know you were well, I did kind of think you would ask this, because I know you're an Xbox fan. But I kind of figured I would get a question about this from somebody. So the first thing I would say is that we do mention in the review that it is on Game Pass. And so no, we're not doing a disservice to it or hiding the fact that you can access the game very cheaply. However, when I create content and manage editorial, I look at the long view. Like, not like next year, like 20 years from now. That review is going to live on SIFTD or on YouTube, really until the end of time, until YouTube goes away or something like that, which could happen someday, but probably not. So I'm like, okay, what if somebody watches this review 20 years from now? They're like, oh, this old game, Avowed, I've heard good things about it. Here's this review, this like 30 minutes. I can spend 30 minutes on this review and know whether it's worth playing or not. How does that do them a service if Game Pass is now gone? I mean, let's be honest, Game Pass could go away. Microsoft could revert back to its old model. Or the other part is that games disappear from Game Pass, which I didn't think was going to happen, but it does happen. We're actually starting to see games disappearing from Nintendo Switch Online as well. And that had happened like 2 days before we recorded Avowed, and that sent off a little flag in my head. I was like, oh, nothing's forever. And so it made me consider what it would be like for someone to watch the review for Avowed years and years from now when maybe Game Pass doesn't exist or it's been removed from Game Pass. So anyway, we're just trying to create an equal playing field for all concerned when we do our reviews. We're not singling out Avowed. We're not singling out Xbox. We're not trying to discourage people from subscribing to Game Pass. We fluff up Game Pass every chance we get. We are definitely evangelists for Game Pass. We talk it up all the time. But I just think in this case, editorially and looking down the road more than just like a year or two, I thought it was the right decision. Okay, that's it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. I hope you guys are having a great week, full of awesome games. I mean, there are just so many good games coming out right now. I appreciate you taking the time to actually watch this instead of going and playing one of those awesome games. Again, this show is a reward because so many people are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/SIFTD. Thank you. I mean it. Thank you. Not just to our $7 patrons, but to every patron. Even if you're just pledging $1 and you're watching this a week later, thank you. If you're just watching this on YouTube, thank you. I appreciate everybody. Everything adds up. It makes a difference for us. So if you like what we're doing here, head to patreon.com/SIFTD. Give us a pledge. We'd appreciate it very much. We'll see you next week.